we're going to take a look back at really how far we've come in terms of our ability to connect people across the world. And let's start by looking at that through the lens of physical connections. So in the 20th century, tremendous progress was made in terms of our ability to transport people from one place to another. And that really came from, first and foremost, a lot of investment of resources, time, people, innovation in our cars. So the cars themselves have advanced in exponential ways over this period of time. They become more efficient, faster, safer, being able to drive for longer distances in a way that now we just take for granted, that we can jump in our car, it's going to work, and we're going to be able to get to wherever we want to go, hopefully. So the second thing is all of the citywide and nationwide infrastructure built around vehicles. Huge connections of interstates and highways, city streets, boulevards, country roads. A huge amount of investment came in the 20th century to build and really foundationally change our cities so that they would be accessible by car. And then along the same time period, we saw investment being made in our airlines in terms of flight, being able to fly from place to place across, initially regionally, and then across the whole country, and then across the world, where now you can get in an airline and fly really wherever you want to go within a matter of a couple of days. So we take for granted all of that infrastructure around transportation that's been built up in the 20th century. And we assume that now we live in a global economy. We're more connected than ever. We can get anywhere. We can talk to people that were previously inaccessible to us. But are we really more connected? Are we really more of one world than ever before? I think especially now, especially today, especially with everything that's happened in the past few months, I think we can say that we are not. We are more divided than ever in many different ways. And I guess I want to start by looking at this from the communities, the physicality of the communities that we live in. We have built our cities around these vehicles. There's a beautiful data visualization that Movil Lab did that shows the proportion of real estate in a city devoted to cars, devoted to bikes, devoted to alternate forms of transportation. And the cars just dominate to the point where our cars are consuming 50 to 60% of most of the cities, and some cities even more. And that's looking at it through the lens of the roads we drive on, but also all of the parking spaces created for those cars. And in some, it dominates the majority of our cities are devoted to the vehicles. And so we have places then that are inaccessible or dangerous for us to walk or ride our bikes or move from place to place because we've divided up our communities by these roads, which are intended to connect us, but truly creating points of division rather than connection. And then, of course, social inequality falls out of that, because where you live has a major impact on your access to a quality education, really great healthcare that's going to help keep you healthy and safe, goods, services, foods, and then, of course, jobs. Where you live is either going to be compatible or incompatible with your profession. Maybe you need to work for a very specific company that isn't local to you and you can't afford to move to where that company is. Or you have personal reasons why you can't move, like a sick relative or a spouse with another job. There are so many examples of people whose geography is incompatible with their profession. And let's say you can get a job. Your earning potential at that job is going to be drastically different based on where you live. And so this social inequality is just baked into the system. And this isn't even talking about racial inequality or gender inequality. I'm just talking about where you live as the basis for some major problems. The second thing is that transportation in and of itself is not accessible to all. Cars are very expensive, and flights are still quite expensive too. And you have to be at a certain economic level to have access to those resources. And even then, you have different access where to be able to fly across the country as the CEO of a company and have one meeting and then fly back, that's not available to everyone. You know, a young entrepreneur who comes from a low-income family and doesn't have the resources to go and meet with that business opportunity, they lose out on that opportunity. That investor or that customer or whomever that they simply don't have access to because they cannot afford the transportation to take them there and they don't live there. The third thing I would say is looking at it through the virtual lens, so the internet. Supposedly something that was supposed to bring us together, bring us closer than ever, connect the world. Initially, this started by doing a magical thing, which was to virtualize information and make it accessible to everyone. And then we sort of shimmed on top of that blogs and then social networks. But our social networks are truly, they didn't foundationally reinvent that. So they're informational networks, not actually social networks. We are able to share information with each other with great ease. You know, instantly I can share information about what I'm doing or what I think across the internet. But the human connection, the true humanity of that equation is totally devoid. And so our social networks can be, because we've removed that human piece, can be full of anger and frustration, honestly, that solely comes out of the fact that I'm just sharing this snippet of information with you, but you don't understand who I am on the other side of that. You don't understand me as a human or my full complex thoughts around that or how I present that to you with the emotional tone and all of that stuff that we communicate outside of just a snippet of text that I could add into a tweet or a message or a single image or even a video. There's a piece missing that separates us as people, me as broadcasting that information and you consuming it, that ends up creating a misunderstanding fundamentally that just creates frustration and problems, and anger is fueled from that. And we're seeing that play out now more than ever. I probably don't have to explain this to you because you get it. So video is maybe one step toward that. I mean, video is saying, okay, you can see my facial expressions, you're hearing my tone, you can understand me a little bit better than you can if in a small tweet, right? But you're still looking at me on the other side of this window. It's like you standing outside of my window and being separated from me, and I'm talking to you, but there's still this barrier between us that we just can't seem to break through. And so I would argue we are still not connected like we would be if you were sitting right in front of me right now. And therein lies the problem. So why should we care about this? Why is it important? Well, right now, COVID-19 exposed these flaws. I mean, in a matter of weeks, all of a sudden this stuff that had been there forever and that we just took for granted, that this is how things are done, this is how business is done, this is how socialization is done, this is how society operates, were just exposed all in one foul swoop. Suddenly our cars could not be used to transport ourselves, to and from the office because it was dangerous for us to gather in the office. We couldn't use these airplanes because it was dangerous to gather in large quantities of people inside of the airplanes. And to that end, the travel, the physical travel itself via airlines and vehicles were part of the problem. That's part of what caused the problem, because we were moving this virus across the world. And so the flaw in that equation was just exposed in the speed that COVID-19 spread across the world. The protests right now, because of George Floyd's murder, have exposed other systemic flaws of inequality and oppression and lack of access and all sorts of things that have just existed for so long under the surface and have now bubbled up, and we've reached a breaking point where it's all come to the surface, and it's very emotional and very raw and very real, and something must be done about it. The economy is crumbling because of a lot of these flaws. And then, of course, we have climate change, the disaster behind the current disaster, just on the horizon, that we have all seen coming for quite a while. And the science is adding up to a tremendous problem that's been created around how we use energy. And primarily because of this transportation infrastructure that we've created, that has exposed issues around how we live in cities, because we see the smog and we know that there's this problem, but there's this even bigger problem because of climate change is happening and it's real. And that is a problem that we all face together as a civilization. So we're at a breaking point on so many levels that it's very overwhelming. And so what we need now is not just an incremental improvement. It's not just slightly better vehicles that are more efficient or electrical or autonomous, and maybe in a smart city of the future, the cars can all drive themselves out and park themselves outside the city and then drive themselves back in. So it's on-demand vehicles, or slightly better efficient airlines, or slight improvements to social inequality. These are all just minor improvements to a flawed system. We have to take a giant leap forward and rethink the system at its core, at its foundation, rethink how we're doing this process. And so I look at virtualization as a possible solution to this. We've already seen this play out a few times, and I want to sort of look through those case studies before I get to really what I see in the virtualization of transportation as one way to address these problems. So I mentioned before the virtualization of information that we saw play out with information on the internet, starting initially way back with spoken word as our means to transfer information, then moving to books, a physical form of that, and eventually virtualizing that onto the internet. A lot of the encyclopedias being virtualized, that sort of information. And then we had blogs take flight, and then social networks sharing information about ourselves. We've really seen this benefit around just sharing information, just raw information at its core. Virtualization of media, so playing out just the creation of film and then DVDs and television, and then eventually streaming that information. It's been a virtualization of that process that now brings media to us ubiquitously. Communication, from phones to video to, we've seen communication transform itself over our lifetime. Money's been virtualized, from gold to physical money to credit cards, then virtual money. And now we've got a possibility of transforming transportation into being a virtual medium. So what would that look like? Well, we need a few things for it. We need a strong internet, of course, a strong backbone of computing that we can transfer large amounts of data. The second thing we need is immersive computing. And I like to call it immersive computing, but it's really a sum of spatial computing. Some people call it virtual reality, augmented reality, extended reality. All of these things, to me, add up to a bigger idea, which is the idea of using software that surrounds a person immersively, something that you experience rather than something a device that you go to, like a phone or a computer. That's how we get at our information, going to these devices, but we're not looking to just transport information. We're looking to transport an experience, and experiences play out subjectively from the first person. And so we have to look at immersive computing not just as a virtual reality or an augmented reality technology, but as an experience that'll play out around us. And so you have to have the hardware to be able to make that possible. And we're in the very early days of this right now with the headsets that we have and the tracking that we have and the devices and even the software that we have. We're in the baby stages of this. You know, I would say, honestly, even if you look at the virtualization of media, we're not even to really the Netflix DVD days. You know, we're still working our way up to that. And because there's a lot of friction, but there is something on the other side of that. And I want to talk a little bit about how that looks. So it's best to look at it, I think, through a few different possibilities. Let's start with maybe education. So COVID-19 has done an interesting thing for education that a lot of the parents maybe watching have experienced, where we've seen how a mostly purely physical process that took place in our schools has been virtualized overnight. And the inherent flaws in that process, benefits and flaws, I would say. So on the benefits, you know, it hasn't been all bad. My kids have had an interest. Oh gosh, it's hard right now to pull out one benefit, but it's been interesting. I've been more connected to my kids' schooling than ever before, just because of their physical proximity to me and our participation in their schoolwork. And I think that's created an interesting dynamic where, as a parent, education's always been outsourced before, but now there's something about it being physically in the home that I'm much more connected to it than I ever was before, in a way that I think actually is kind of healthy, because I understand the challenges and the benefits of educating a kid. And really seeing that play out in a way has been interesting. But the challenges of it are many, and I would say it's primarily driven around the issue of just sharing information back and forth with the instructors and with the other students. So just a teacher posting an assignment and a student posting their reply, it just doesn't have the magic of having that human interaction that can play out. So what would the future of this look like if we virtualize this process? Well, what it means is that we can have the benefits of a physical system where my kid can sit down at a desk. They can be looking around at students. They could chat with a student by them, but they could still be listening to the teacher and have a lot of the social dynamics that play out in a physical classroom, but virtualized into a virtual classroom, that they don't have to be bused across the city to get to a good school. They don't have to have these super spreading events where a whole school gets sick with not just something like COVID-19, but even a flu or other viruses that happen all the time right now within our schools. they can have this physically connected experience, but physically separated. Socially connected, physically separated. The second thing I would point to is our professional lives. I already brought out the issues around transportation, professional transportation. It's so common for us to fly across the country for a conference or a meeting or to pitch a customer. And do those meetings really have to happen in person, face to face? Could we virtualize those interactions into a higher quality interaction that takes place locally, not by physically transporting ourselves? How that would look, I would point to applications like The Wild, which is the company that I'm building. So The Wild is an immersive collaboration tool for professionals to work together in augmented and virtual reality. And primarily The Wild is built for environmental designers or architects to work together. So we combine a few things: people together in a virtualized space, places, so the physical locations where they're trying to build their work, and ideas, the ideas that they want to build out on those places. And the magic of immersive computing is that we can connect those ideas in ways that were not possible before. Early in the idea stage, they can mass out like a crude mass of a physical building and experience that at one-to-one scale, like immersively inside of it, while it's still just a raw idea, all the way through to construction phase where they can augment a building onto a physical site and experience it in augmented reality shared amongst a group of people physically on that location, but virtually connecting the idea onto the physical site so that it can be aligned rather than flipping through pages and pages of blueprints or trying to explain something that is physical with your hands. So no, it needs to be like over here and it needs to look like this. That's very hard to communicate in that way. So that's professionally one look at how this virtualization process can play out. Another one is personally. So just this weekend, my daughter, Clara, my oldest daughter, had her 9th birthday, and I really wanted to do something special for her birthday. And so we had the challenge where we're still physically isolated from our community, and I didn't want her to get together to have a birthday party at this time. And so we decided to use virtual reality as a means for her to have that party. And I distributed headsets to 3 of her girlfriends, and we all came together inside of virtual reality, inside of a space, and we had a party in virtual reality together, all from our homes. So the girls started on a giant checkers board and played like life-size checkers where they were sort of the pieces jumping around, and they ran through a giant maze together. They were laughing and getting frustrated and going back to the beginning. And, you know, I was watching them go through this and trying to help them through as sort of a giant inside of that space, looking down at the maze that they were running through. And we went onto a pirate ship and played around on a pirate ship for a bit. And, you know, it was a little girl's 9th birthday. And it was awesome. Not just because it was in virtual reality, but because they had a good time together. And so I look back now at her other birthdays, like the birthday that we had at the trampoline gym and the birthday that we had in our backyard. And then there's this birthday that we had in virtual reality. And honestly, it's sort of the same thing. I have a memory about it now that was formed, and they have memories about it, about all these different things that they did that played out as an experience that they can carry with them through their life, just like any other physical event. And that gave me so much hope to see it not just as something that is possible to do in the future someday, but to see as something that we did this last weekend. And it was imperfect, of course. It's not the fully realized simple thing to do that is totally accessible to everyone, but there's the seed of something special there, the seed of something exciting, that you see how we can take one step and then another step and another step, and we can create something new with this, something that isn't a small incremental improvement, but that really solves a foundational problem and has a new dynamic that we can look objectively at all the problems that have come before, but do something new, create something better, use our creativity to create something better. And so both professionally, personally, in the way that we educate ourselves, in the way that we interact together across the world as humans, there is something awaiting us if we're able to virtualize this transportation process and really solve some of these systemic problems that have been there forever. And what is on the other side? Well, maybe we can rethink the way our cities are designed, the way our communities are designed, the way we've cut up our entire landscape, and bring more nature back to it by physically allowing ourselves to work and live locally while connecting ourselves virtually to the millions of people across the world virtually. So I'm not arguing for a complete virtualization so that we live in virtual reality and you sort of embody that science fiction dystopic view of the future where we neglect our physical environment and it's just everything is virtual now. It's actually the opposite of that, because it's not just about having a virtual reality. It's about having a physical reality that is more natural, less machines in our physical world that are dominating our cities, and bringing more nature back to our physicality, letting us spread out rather than just clustering in these big cities, but spreading out across the real estate that we have, this country, this world that we have, and rethinking the way we live so that we can work and live locally, and then using that virtualization process to connect us so that I can physically sit at my dinner table or at my desk and be connected to everyone from my dad across the country to my a potential customer who is across the world. And having that access to all of those different people, not just informational access, but physical, human access, sitting there across from them. And that's exciting to me. That's truly exciting to me. I feel like we're at the start of something. We're at the end of something and a breaking point that we're seeing bubbling up all across the world, but all ends have the possibility of a new beginning. And so I choose to have that hope. I choose to look for something better on the other side of it. When it's so easy to be frustrated and feel fear and anger about what's happening right now, I choose to focus on the creativity of what is to come, the possibility that awaits us if we take a good hard look at the problems that exist and have a vision for something better that's on the other side. So thank you for letting me share my vision for what awaits us, and I'd love to hear yours as well. Thank you.